Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Publishing Dialogue. Today, I have Neerja and Pranika with me back on the show, and we have a new topic that we're going to discuss about and open the space for comments and discussion. So, the topic on hand for today is the reader's choice. What would you read on, ebooks or paperbacks? I think this is quite a hot topic of discussion, and we're digital publishers, but we're by no means against paperbacks. We all love paperbacks, and yeah, it's I think something interesting to talk about and see what is happening in the market currently. Ebooks are evolving, but by no means are paperbacks becoming obsolete. So it's an interesting discussion. So I want to start off by asking Pranika and Neerja to share what they're reading currently and what format are they reading on.
Okay. Neerja, why don't you go first?
Sure, yeah. So I'm actually reading 1,000 Splendid Suns right now, and it's the paperback version of it. Yeah, reading for the first time, very excited. Pranka, what are you reading?
I'm reading this book called Beginnings Again at Sunset Cottage. It's quite an interesting sort of second chance romance, and I'm actually reading digitally. I'm reading on my phone. Yeah.
Okay, on your phone. I think that's quite interesting to know that it's not like on an e-reader or a Kindle, but it's on your phone because I feel a lot of people still aren't used to that. So that's quite interesting. I personally am also currently reading a paperback called The Road Trip by Beth O'Leary. Just picked it up and it seemed enticing enough to read as a paperback. So I thought, why not? But yeah, what is the format that you're currently reading? Is it something that you usually would prefer, or that's the one that you favor, or is it you're kind of on a mix of both? I'm posing this to obviously both of you.
So I used to be a really paperback purist. I think that's how you always start out, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, I was. But I think once you dabble into the digital space, you realize that there's a lot more to it's about the convenience. It's about the fact that it's accessible to you everywhere all the time, and especially when you're a regular reader, you tend to want something with you constantly, and that's not always possible with a physical book, for example. So I'm definitely I don't necessarily have a preference, and it also depends on what I'm reading and when I'm reading. But yeah, I've definitely evolved into someone who's very accepting of both formats.
Wow, okay, that's interesting. I mean, I would like to say that I don't have a preference, but at the moment, I've been stuck to reading digitally because I started out like all readers reading paperbacks. I still have a habit of carrying a paperback even if I don't read it. It's a weird thing, but as Neerja said, ebooks are convenient, and I have not read a paperback as such since like 2 years. I mean, I've not bought a paperback since 2 years actually, because it's just so easy and convenient, and it's just a click, isn't it, to get a book and start reading it, and then you can change like your fonts and font sizes, and you can have it in like a dark mode and a light mode. And I think one factor that really helped my choice was the fact that reading at night, because I don't have like a reading lamp, and I don't like keeping my light on, because then that's really annoying if you're going to sleep and you just want to read a couple of pages. So I can easily toggle my settings to have like a sepia or a dark mode where it's not too bright, and I can read on that. It's just so much easier. So yeah, I mean, I've made a permanent switch to ebooks at the moment.
You've chosen one side.
More or less.
Kind of accepting both. I think I am on Neerja's side. I'm kind of what she is on both, but I completely think for me it happens not. It's a conscious choice about convenience, because if I'm traveling, I don't want to be packing like 3 or 4 paperbacks anymore. Like how you used to do back in the day. You're going to your grandmother's house for summer vacations and you're carrying 4 or 5 books with you. Now it's so much more convenient because you can download them on your iPad or your phone, or if you have a reader. That, and especially if you're traveling to work, like Pranika said, she would still carry the paperback. I think for me, it's so much more easier that I have the reading on a device I'm already taking with me, lightens your load. But at the same time, I won't say that I've not bought a paperback in recent times because I still love the nostalgic feel of holding the book, smelling the pages. Just, it's so much more personal. It's like the characters are more alive. Not that they're not alive with ebooks, it still happens. You would think that when you're reading it, the reading experience is different. I feel that's not the case, actually. Ultimately, you're still involved in the characters and the story and the plot, but it's just the convenience. And there is a nostalgic factor attached to paperbacks, I feel.
Absolutely.
I do think one thing that was very interesting that Pranika mentioned about the sepia tone and the customization. I still today reject paperbacks, which I don't like the color of the paper. If it's too white or if it's too light, it doesn't sit well with my eye. But with ebooks, you have those customization options. So you can choose your font, you can choose your color tone, which I think makes so much sense. Definitely. And like you said, with the pandemic, so the past 2 years, I think it's a lot. The pandemic has to do a lot with the fact that you haven't bought a paperback because it is definitely safer and more at availability is just so much more easy. I think Nirja was telling us, in fact, a couple of days ago about her old publishing house.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
so I used to work for a children's imprint, and of course we were completely into physical books. But during the pandemic, it's not just about the delivery service or the bookshops being shut, the printing presses themselves were shut.
Exactly.
So the books were literally not being printed for a very large amount of time, at which point then you don't I know a lot of publishing houses faced a lot of issues and there were massive layoffs. But then I think a lot of companies actually did adapt to the idea of that, which my company did by converting like our older books into ebook formats and then started selling them as ebooks. And that's kind of how we sustained. And I've seen it definitely work because the sales were translated almost entirely into ebooks. So you would think that it took like a large hit, but we did actually pretty well even during the pandemic period. So there is definitely a willingness in readers to switch to something that's more convenient, of course, when when they don't actually have the other option.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
And
really
I mean, to pick up on that one, like reading became a really big part of the pandemic because a lot of people adapted that habit. And I think the reason why that happened was because ebooks existed and, there was a space for people to sort of indulge in those without stepping out of their houses, going to the bookstore, getting in contact with anyone, which was and it was easy, convenient. As I said, one click and you have it right there, and you have. I mean, for the nostalgic factor, like Aarti was talking about, there is like, I mean, yeah, you don't get the smell and the feel of paper for sure. You don't. That's something that I miss, which is why I carry a paperback even when I'm not reading it. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna read it, but I don't. So, even with, I mean, barring the nostalgic factor, someone who bookmarks or annotates or makes tiny notes, someone like that, they have that option available on an ebook. It's not the experience, while the physical book and an ebook of the nostalgic factor differs, but at the same time it's very very similar in terms of reading it, consuming it, and making those notes and bits like that. So yeah.
I think I think it's just more of a habit based thing because again ebooks are quite a new invention if you think about it in terms of like just the two like timelines, so paperbacks or just like print in general has been around since like the 15th century. I mean, even before that, but it became really popular with like the advent of the printing press.
Correct.
While ebooks actually came out in like 1971, that was the first time that a book was digitized. So if you think about it relatively, it's such a short amount of time for the amount of popularity that ebooks have gained.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it definitely when you think about like the larger picture, there still seems to be like a disparity in the sense of people prefer paperbacks more than ebooks. But when you think about it in terms of how the rate of the rate of growth, essentially, it's a lot more than you would imagine. Like for example, the print books, the print sales in 2020, they were 13.2%. Yeah, but the ebook sales grew by 22% comparatively, which is
So, I mean,
Right.
excellent point that market penetration for ebooks is just on the rise since they were introduced. And I think the pandemic has just accelerated the growth for print and ebooks. If anything was slowing down in 2018 and 19, it's kind of jumped the gun in the past 2 years during the pandemic. And, we've looked at researches like Nija just mentioned, and we noticed that there were 191 million ebooks sold alone in the United States itself. And whereas print book sales were, of course, far more, being a 750 million, but I think the fact that there were almost 200 million ebooks that were sold, that's an astounding number because that's definitely an increase over the past few years.
absolutely.
Definitely. And we see people around the world sort of adapting that. And coming to, the publisher side of the debate for us specifically, the cost of publishing an ebook, that's usually been a topic of live debate amongst a lot of people where you say, well, but ebooks are easier to produce and it's not that costly, whereas paperbacks, just because there's the print aspect of it, that becomes expensive, but it's actually not true. We did ebooks were easier to publish earlier, but the cost gap now has become much less, and it's about the equal sales productions for both ebooks as well as paperbacks. So yeah, that's definitely
Like we were discussing, the feel and the effect of both the formats is not that varied. The difference is not very large, and that comes to the fact of manufacturing, because even to manufacture an ebook, you have typically, we as digital publishers know, you have your formatting, you have your fonts, you have the experience of the e-reader. We want all of those things to be maximized to have the best reading experience. So in no ways is ebooks any longer a cheap option to go for. And the prices say that we've compared prices for a couple of books. I think I'll let Nirja speak about the two books.
Yeah, so we actually checked a few books, but this was the most shocking one. Was I think so J.K. Rowling's The Christmas Pig. The hardcover is actually for $1578 I believe, and the ebook is $15.99. So there's only like a 21-cent difference, which I believe the reason I think that ebook started becoming really popular. One of the core sort of principles or just goals was to make it a lot more cheaper and more affordable for people to be able to read them, which has changed over time. Again, like in Nicholas Sparks's The Wish, so it's $15.99 hardcover and $14.99 ebook. Yeah, so I think that there's the gap, the really small gap, kind of discourages people, and they tend to sort of revert to what they're comfortable with and what they're familiar with instead of going for the newer format if they have to spend about the same amount of money.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. And I think the environmental factor that you mentioned plays a big part because, as you said, people started out with wanting to sort of save the trees and save paper, but now with the servers being digitalized and them having the whole carbon dioxide emission bits, it's
this is something I'd really like to address because it's a very common misconception that ebooks are more environmentally friendly. In fact, before I did this research, I used to think the same thing. But there's a lot of elements involved in it, and it's definitely not black or white. Like no one is better. It depends on your consumption behavior and the resources that are being used. For example, like when you're doing a a paper back essentially. So the paper, first of all, obviously the trees are cut down. The chemicals used to get a certain quality of paper, like Akriti mentioned, she won't go for a paper that's too white or like something that looks like it's worn in. All of that is done intentionally with chemicals. The ink, the glue that's used, the efforts that it takes for it to get printed, to go to the bookstore, to actually reach the reader, all of that has a huge environmental impact, of course. But the good part is that books are recycled
Yeah.
a lot better once once their life cycle. Yeah. On the other hand, so when you think about e-readers, you assume that none of these problems exist in that space. However, you do still need a lot of resources like rare metal earths. You need silicon for the chips and the CPU, and copper, for example. And they use electricity and Wi-Fi, all of which have like their own carbon footprint and environmental impact.
Correct, exactly.
To think about. And e-readers are a lot harder to recycle. They are recycled, but they're a lot harder to recycle than a normal book. So again, there's no black and white here, because the thing is that it depends on your consumption. So the general conclusion is that if you're a heavy reader, then you should go for an ebook, right? Because you have multiple books in that one device. It's easier to get rid of instead of 10 books, for example. Where, it kind of, it's the same amount of impact then. But if you're a light reader, then buying paperbacks is not as much of an issue, because your carbon footprint is going to be a lot lesser. So that's just greenhouse gas emission.
I think that's an interesting point about specifically e-readers, because I feel since ebooks are available through different apps such as Kindle's app, Kobo's app, and even Saga. That's why we have, it's available on your phone easily, or on your iPad or any other tablet that you own. So you're kind of eliminating the need of a third-party reader or a third-party device to read on. Whereas even like for a paperback, you need a third-party. You're buying the book as a separate entity to read. And I think that definitely kind of helps the scenario. And you're minimizing the entire, you're making it more efficient. You're making reading completely efficient. That's actually what we set out to do with Saga. Why we did the mobile app rather than just putting it out on Amazon. It's just the fact that it's so easy for you to access. And that's where the prices also come in, because as we discussed, now with ebooks becoming popular, that's the reason prices are high. It's not just the manufacturing cost, it's also the popularity. And with our own platform, with Saga, we can manage the prices and we can have it out to the customers at a cheaper rate, which with the popularity of just books, fiction books, ebooks in general, prices are high everywhere. And I think that's something appealing to the readers.
That's right. And I think to add to what Akriti was saying about sort of Saga fitting into the scenario of e-reading and ebooks, we have it's essentially to provide a space for all your reading, and you to sort of give readers that option all under one space, to get because while it's nice to browse and have choices, but at the same time it's also nice to have, okay, I just want to read romance, click on romance and then get all your romance reads and figure out what you want to do. So it gives you both options. It's not limited. It's like a bookstore, but it's a convenient bookstore. So I think that sort of helps. Yeah, for sure. Anything else? Anything you want to add?
I think that was an interesting dialogue that we had about ebooks versus paperbacks, and we discussed personal preferences and kind of, discussed where the market is at with both formats. I think it's safe to say either format is not dying anytime soon, and there are various other formats coming up, such as audiobooks and flash fiction, and things which we'll definitely discuss in further dialogues to come. Yes, but for our readers, for our audiences who are watching this, tell us which you prefer, which is your go-to choice, ebook or paperback. Do you prefer an e-reader? Do you prefer reading on your mobile device? Tell us all about it. Yeah, and we will see you next week with another dialogue.
Yes, definitely. Tell us your preferences. We'd hope to start sort of debate in our comment section as well. So definitely let us know. And thank you so much for listening and watching us. And we hope to have a nice saucy topic next time as well.
Thank you all for joining.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.